What is going on, Sandals Church Youth? So glad that you're here with us, all of our campuses. My name is Justin Knowles, and I get to help lead Sandals Youth. And here's the deal. Tonight's message is probably one of the most important things that you're going to hear all of 2020 when it comes to us as a ministry. And I believe that it literally, if we could get this, it will literally change our ministry. It will change you, and it will change the friends around you. And I really do believe that. So I want you to write this down. Write it down right now. I can't reach all, but I could reach one. I can't reach all, but I could reach one. See, what do I mean? It's that when we think of evangelism, right? We've been in this series about we are Sandals Church Youth, about stepping into new territory, living a life that demands explanation. Jared last week talked about, hey, when we live a life that demands explanation, it's really easy to say, hey, come and see. So that's why First Wednesdays, Winter Conference, next week, by the way, can't wait for that. That all this is opportunities for you to come and see what Jesus is all about. And when we think about evangelism, a lot of us, we think we have like a weird thing in our head that we have to like talk to everybody about everything. That's like standing up at on our lunch table in our quad and preaching the gospel, or standing on the street corner holding signs, or whatever it is that whatever evangelism word you have stuck in your head. That's not what we're talking about. What if I told you it was way simpler than that? What if I told you that it's way more effective than that? What if I told you that if this year of Sandals Church Youth, if all this year you had to do is reach one person, how much more doable is that? That's all. That if you were to reach one person to go, that they could believe in Jesus and be baptized, instead of reaching everybody, we could reach one person. That would literally change the game. It's actually doable. It's less daunting, that we could actually take up that challenge and to really begin to change the lives of somebody else, of someone that we say that we care about. That if we're intentional about with one friend, we're going to be so much more effective. And the story that I want to look through, it's in 1 Kings, where we look at this guy named Elijah, who is a prophet of God, that he literally comes alongside and puts his arm around Elisha. I know, it's kind of confusing, Elijah and Elisha. But he literally comes and puts his arm around him. That's his one person that he's going to walk alongside with, show him the ways of God. And God does some amazing things through that. And we could be challenged in those things, that if we just focus on one person, God begins to literally change everything. So I want you to read this with me. It's in 1 Kings 19, starting in verse 19. It says, so Elijah went from there and found Elisha, the son of Shaphat. Almost said Snapchat. That's really funny, okay? He was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen, and he himself was driving the 12 pairs. So what does that mean? So Elisha, in a word, he was rich. Elisha, he was a working man. He could have had his servants out there. He could have had other people out there, but he had 12 yokes of oxen, so that's a lot of livestock, and he was out plowing his fields. And a lot of us, when we look at our friends, we usually kind of think of like, oh, they're good, they're fine, oh, they don't need this, or they don't need, but here's the thing, is that Elisha was probably that person. He probably had everything that he needed. He had servants, he had land, he had money, he had all these things, but Elijah still went out to search for him, still went out to challenge him in his life, despite of what Elisha's life might have been like, okay? Next verse. Elijah went up to him and threw his cloak around him. Basically what that means, he said, hey, he's put his arm around him and said, hey, I want you to come and see what it is that God has in store for you. He's basically saying, I'm choosing you. I want to invest into your life so that way I could show you the ways of God. And I want to be involved with you intentionally. It's not just eeny, meeny, miny, mo, you, I'm going to pick you. No. It's like a friend that you know, like, hey, I'm going to put my arm around you and I'm going to let them know, I'm going to start praying for you. Hey, how can I pray for you? Hey, come into a First Wednesday. Come to a Winter Conference. Come and see what this is all about. Verse 20. Elisha then left his oxen, ran after Elijah. He said, let me kiss my father and mother goodbye, he said, and then I will come with you. Go back, Elijah replied. What have I done to you? Verse 21, it says, so Elisha left him and went back. He took his yoke of oxen and he slaughtered them and burned the plowing equipment to cook the meat and gave it to the people, and they ate. So here's the thing, is like that might sound intense, but here's the great thing about what Elijah did with Elijah. He told Elisha his purpose. He said that God has a purpose for you. He was able to show him and cast this whole thing that, hey, what you're doing here, what you're chasing after, yeah, it's great and you have all the things, but God has something better for you. And it was so compelling that Elisha literally burned and gave up everything so that way he wouldn't turn back. And that way he would literally come along with Elijah and show him the ways of God. And here's the thing is, and here's something I want to challenge you, is that you have no idea what God could do in somebody else's life through you. Think about that. You have no idea what God could do in somebody else's life through a conversation, through you being intentional with one person this year. That we're not called to change people. In fact, we don't have that ability. But if we're called to obey, God changes people, not us. And then look at how this ends. It says, then he set out to follow Elijah, and he became his servant. So we see Elijah going to Elisha, putting his arm around him, being intentional that this was his one person. And he's going to show them the ways of God. And God calls us to reach others. In the same way, God is calling us. And I believe in Sandals Church Youth vision of this year is that each one of us is challenged to go out and reach that one person. One person who does not go to church. I don't want another kid to go from another church. I want someone that you would think that would never, ever step foot in a church. That's who your one person this year should be. He was able to cast this vision and say, hey, what it is that you're doing, it's great, but it's leading down a path that is not towards God. And then we're called to do the same with our friends ourselves. That Elisha was Elijah's one. And my question is, who's yours? Who's your one? See, but first, and I want us to understand, we need to understand why we don't. Why don't we? Why are we so hesitant to go out and talk to our friends about our faith? And I've narrowed down to two things. It's comfort and complacency. Complacency and comfort. These two things, I think, is literally what keeps us from going out to our friends. So I want to talk about the first one. I want you to write it down up in your notes, complacency. See, best way I could describe it. Have you ever been too lazy to clean up your room, so you just don't? Right? Your room is just messy. And then what happens is that oh man, I don't want to clean up, so I'm not going to. And then what happens over time is that you don't notice that your room is messy. Right? You just become complacent with how your room is. And then finally, when someone finally steps into the room, they're like, wow, your room is really messy. And you're like, well, really? I haven't really noticed, right? That's kind of like the idea. And sometimes that happens with our faith, is that we get complacent in our faith. That sometimes we don't even notice that we're being lazy in our faith, and we don't go out and are not intentional, and we don't have this sense of urgency to share our faith to our friends, because for a lot of us, we're just okay with the way things are. And the truth is that you have friends around you who you say we care about, who you say that you care about, who are going to be eternally separated from God because they don't know who Jesus is, that are walking around eternally dying, yet we're not willing to have a conversation with them. That if we're not careful, we're going to spend more time worrying about the rest of this school year finishing strong more than where some of our best friends spend eternity. And I don't want that for our group. I want our group to get out of complacency and to step out. Because here's what happens, and what I've seen is that on Wednesday nights, for a lot of us, we enjoy coming to our thing. Wednesday nights is our thing. I want to go to my group at my church with my leader and my group of people that I get to spend my time with to make sure that no one else comes in, so I could be real. And having someone else come in and join my group, that's going to just ruin the vibe. I don't want to be open with somebody else. I don't want to be real with somebody else coming in, because I just don't want it to ruin my thing that I got going on here at the church. Right? That's what a lot of us, when we think about that, that's what happens in our group. Some of us, we become complacent in our friendships because we don't want to mess up the good things we got going with our friends, that we're afraid that if we bring up Jesus, it's going to mess things up. And so we become complacent. See, Elisha, he had everything. He had everything. And Elijah, he's done, if you read the rest of 1 Kings, he's done so much in his faith for God. He could have stopped and it would have been good. We would have said, man, look at all the things that Elijah has done, but he doesn't stop. He doesn't become complacent. He still is actively seeking what God is calling him to do. And he was not complacent. See, have you ever had to do so much? Like you have a big old laundry list of things to do, that it's overwhelming, and that the moment you just do one of the things, like, oh, I folded laundry today. Wow, I'm done. I need to take a nap. Like, I'm not going to finish the rest of my stuff. Like, we can become complacent in our faith, and this is what we do. So here's my question to you. Who's the one friend in your group that you've become complacent with? That you have not sought in a deeper relationship, intentional relationship with them, to talk to them about your faith? The second thing is comfort. Comfort is what keeps us from sharing. And I'm not gonna lie to you, I love to be comfy. I have a pair of Ugg slippers at home. It's like walking on clouds. I'm not gonna lie to you. The moment I get home, I kick off my shoes. It's like Mr. Rogers, right? Like I kick off my shoes, I put on my comfy slippers. I wear a pair of stretchy pants that my wife forbids me to wear outside in public, but I put them on at home because they're so comfy. I love it. The bed that I sleep in is so comfortable. I want it. The bathrobes, when I go to hotel rooms, I put it on. I don't care what my wife says. It's super comfy. I go down into the breakfast lobby with it because I feel like royalty, right? Like that's how much we love comfort in our lives, that it will allow us to do some things. And here's the thing, that Jesus calls us out of our comfort zones sometimes. He does. That's what he does. He calls us out of our comfort. And here's the truth, if we could be honest, it's uncomfortable sometimes to talk to your friends about Jesus. It is. Because we don't know. We're afraid of what they're going to think of us. We're afraid of what they're going to say. We're afraid that we're not going to have the right things to say. We're afraid that we're not going to know how to answer some of their questions. We're afraid to throw it out there to them to come and see what's going on. But here's the thing. I was trying to figure out why. And here's what I come up with, is that we care. Listen, we care more about what they think of us more than what God wants to do in their life. We care more about what they think about us, but about their perception of us more than what God wants to do in them. And then here's a question that I want to ask us is, are we willing to get uncomfortable a little bit so that we could share our faith about the life-saving power of Jesus with our friends who don't know who he is? Elisha had it made. He was rich. He had people. He had things. He had people to do all those things, whatever he wanted. He lived a life of comfort. But the moment that someone came alongside of him and showed him that there's something better out there for him, that God has a purpose for them, that he will fulfill all those things that he's worked so hard for, that he seems to have this void in his life, that when we are able to come around and show other people what God has for them, Elisha burned all of his stuff to come follow Elijah and see what God has for him. That we have that same capability with our friends, guys. That we have that same responsibility for our friends who are far from God, to bring them near to God, to come and say like, hey, if my life demands to live a life of explanation where people look at me and how I live out my faith and say there's something different about them. And then we could say, hey, come and see what Jesus is all about. Just come and see the first Wednesday. Come and see at this conference. Come and see at summer camp. Come and see my group where I could be real and vulnerable and honest. When you come and see and just let God work in them, it's amazing what God could do. We have no idea what God could do in the life of our friends if we're just obedient. That Elijah understood that he couldn't reach everyone, but he could reach one person. And again, it goes back to this, is that I can't reach all, but I could reach one. I could reach one. So how could your closest friend life change because you were intentional with them this year? So my question to you, and we're going to talk about this in a group, is this: who is your one? Who is your one for 2020? Who is your one of a friend in your group that you already know, you already have a relationship with, that you could be intentional with? That you could let them know that you're praying for them, that you could intersect in their life and say, hey, invite them to come and see. Who is your one person who is far from God, so that you could bring them near to God this year? And then watch what God does. And I think we'll be pleasantly surprised at how God works in those things. So your youth lead's gonna come up right now. We're gonna finish out this series with talking about who is your one in our small groups, and I'm really excited to see what that looks like. We'll see you next week at Winter Conference. Bye.